Hello and welcome to this YouTube channel of the Indian Society of Gastroenterology Kerala Chapter. I am Dr.G N Ramesh and I am in conversation with Professor K Vinaychandran Nair. Welcome you, sir, to this conversation. Professor K Vinaychandran Nair, as you all know, is one of the senior most gastroenterologists in the state of Kerala, and called also very affectionately the father of gastroenterology in northern Kerala. Such a pleasure to have you, sir, with us today. And today in my conversation with you, I'd probably focus on something that really never gets to be discussed in conferences these days, that is clinical gastroenterology. Now, I would like you to trace back your career to the very beginning, and I would just like to ask you, why is it that you became a gastroenterologist? How is it that you became a gastroenterologist?
Well, that's a long story. It all started when I was doing my MD in internal medicine at Wayanad Medical College, and I had very venerable teachers like Professor Pai, Professor G K Vinaychandran, very inspiring teachers. And the most outstanding feature of these teachers was their extremely skillful clinical assessment and judgment. They were clinicians par excellence.
You could tell our viewers the year?
That was in 1968.
So many of them would not have been born at that time.
And what struck me was that without any of these new instruments or equipments, they could reach a certain type of precision in their diagnosis. Amazing. I remember Professor G K Vinaychandran using all this tuning fork and knee hammer and examining the patient in detail after eliciting the history for a long time. And then finally coming to the conclusion that this person has a tumor in this part of the brain. And he proved exactly correct when the neurosurgeon operated on this patient. So such were the clinical skills of these masters. And I did not find that lack of instruments ever interfered with the decision making or diagnosis. And I finished my internal medicine MD, and obviously Professor G K Vinaychandran was more interested in neurology. So I was certainly interested in taking up neurology, because the clinical challenge at that time, and to come to a diagnosis, something, organs which you do not see, but yet you could make accurate diagnosis. That was challenging. It's challenging. Take, for example, dermatologists, they can see everything and they can make a diagnosis. Or pulmonologist or cardiologist. But gastrointestinal tract is a very wide system of organs, all unavailable for clinical examination. And the same type of approach that you have in neurology also applies to gastrointestinal system.
So abdomen as a Pandora's box is what attracted you to this specialty?
Yes.
Okay. Now you have worked both in private, government sector, and you then went on to the private sector. How do you compare these two? Now, people working in the government sector, they've got a different set of challenges. People working in the private sector have got different set of challenges.
Well, when after DM, when I came back to Calicut Medical College, from where I had been deputed to undergo training in gastroenterology, I thought way back in institute we had all the clinical skills available but limited investigations. But this was a time of transformation, and you needed a lot of equipment because endoscopes were available at that time after this. And setting up a department in the government sector was the most daunting task because of various types of red tapes. Secondly, the attitude of the clinicians at that time, that they didn't want to somebody to encroach onto their domain, because surgeons said we were all treating gastrointestinal diseases, so why should there be a gastroenterologist? We have endoscopes, why should gastroenterologists have endoscopes? So they were discouraged, and it was an extremely difficult task for setting up a department. Unlike, of course, in the private sector, if there are people willing to spend money, then things become easy.
So basically, there were set of problems in the government sector, and that is when you moved over to the private sector. But was the private sector also, was it a bed of roses, or did you find a problem adapting to the private sector from the government sector?
Well, when I had started organizing the department at Calicut Medical College, although there were a lot of difficulties, there were senior teachers who encouraged me to go on and develop the department. So in that way, I stayed there, developed the department, and I started the DM course before I retired. So that was a challenge, but I faced the challenge and successfully overcame all hurdles in my service in medical college. So I have no regret at all.
In fact,
except that things move very slowly, and sometimes the red tape is such that you get frustrated.
But did the fact that at that same period of time, there was this department that was being developed in Trivandrum also, and did that encourage you? Did that help you in any way?
I think I have heard that Dr. Balakrishnan also had a similar experience in Trivandrum.
Yes.
So both of us as pioneers had this all similar
starting problems, teething problems you would call. But now if you reflect back, these are all a learning process, a growing process. I think it is.
My main interest was that I was interested in teaching, and therefore that attracted me and kept me in the medical college, overcoming all hurdles.
So my next two questions will be centered around these two. One is, you are considered a doyen as far as clinical gastroenterology is concerned, and you have also lamented the fact that over a time period, clinical gastroenterology has sort of come down. The importance of clinical gastroenterology has come down. So today, now 2022, what do you think are the set of challenges that are being faced by clinical gastroenterology?
Well, my initial years of training were purely clinical gastroenterology, because All India Institute never had an endoscope, very limited investigational tools like varium studies. But yet, I remember with great gratitude the attitude of Professor V. N. Tandon, who was our professor, who was an excellent clinician. So not only that we had during our internal medicine days excellent clinicians, that was also the experience when we joined DM. There also the clinical assessment and the clinical approach was very great, and that molded our attitude towards clinical gastroenterology. And he used to say that developments will come in future, but doesn't matter, that all technological advances you can master yourself, provided you are well grounded in clinical gastroenterology. And that, I think that message has remained with me till date, and I do not belittle at all the clinical aspect of gastroenterology, even though I do all endoscopic procedures myself. So I have a balance between the clinical gastroenterology and technological advances.
We are in conversation with Professor K Vinaychandran Nair, and we are talking to him about clinical gastroenterology and academic gastroenterology. So, clinical gastroenterology, of course, you have been able to master both clinical gastroenterology and endoscopy, and you have been able to carry them together. But what would be your advice or message to this newer generation of gastroenterologists that are coming out? We know that they are actually in a way deprived of teaching in clinical gastroenterology. So what would be your message to this to the young gastroenterologists?
I would certainly, whatever technological advances we have attained or we will attain in future, you cannot ignore clinical gastroenterology, because that is the hallmark of succeeding in diagnosing and treating patients. Technology should be subservient to the clinical gastroenterologist. Otherwise, what will happen is the gradual decay and the decline of the clinical skills, and that doesn't augur good for the specialty.
Yes. In fact, there has been, discussions, and there are people who say that in due course of time, clinical gastroenterology would probably become extinct, because the moment a person becomes a gastroenterologist today, he or she either wants to specialize in third space endoscopy or endoscopic ultrasound. I mean, they seem to be focused mainly on subspecialties, but not in clinical gastroenterology as such. But as a teacher of teachers, what is it that you feel that we seniors can do to further the importance of clinical gastroenterology in the teaching program?
Well, when I was training DM candidates in my department, we had given so much importance to clinical discussions. And we always used to say that, come what may, whatever newer technologies come, there should be subservient to the impressions that you gain on clinical aspects of the disease. My professor G K Vinaychandran used to say, whenever you see a patient, you need to answer two things. Number one, where is his disease? Number two, what is his disease? Until you answer these two things, you have not made a diagnosis. And for both of this, irrespective of the advances in technology, you need to have clinical assessment of the patient in order to make a correct diagnosis. There are umpteen examples I can quote where things have gone wrong. For example, a patient with abdominal pain came to me. For 3 months he has severe pain. He was seen by a young gastroenterologist. And what he did was, he did an ultrasound, he did an endoscopy, and he found Helicobacter pylori. And he said all ills are due to Helicobacter pylori. Obviously the patient did not improve and went on with analgesics, and he came back to me. So I spent about 15-20 minutes asking him, where is his pain, what is the nature of the pain, what happens, clinical assessment. And it occurred to me very clearly that this man has a colonic obstruction. And a colonoscopy showed right colonic carcinoma. How much of time has been wasted? How much of suffering the patient has had?
How much of resources have been wasted?
Had ever been the young gastroenterologist able to sit with him and probe the details of his clinical illness, this would not have happened. So, in spite of all the technological advances, you need to have good skills in clinical gastroenterology, and the teachers should see to it that during the training they are well exposed to clinical gastroenterology.
That was a very important message. Okay, before I let you go, 3 rapid fire questions. 1, your role model senior in gastroenterology.
Professor B. N. Tandon, certainly, because he was my teacher for DM gastroenterology. Professor Circus, because after my DM, I went to UK on Commonwealth and British WHO fellowships, and I had I was greatly fortunate enough to work in 2 of the university hospitals. And Professor Circus was the professor of gastroenterology at Western General Hospital, Edinburgh. And subsequently, I worked with Professor Peter Cotton in Middlesex Hospital, and also sometime in Manchester. They all were excellent teachers. In fact, the basics of endoscopy I learned from Dr. Circus. He used to stand beside me and show me how to introduce the scope. And then after some time he said, you introduce, you interpret. So I say, this is the finding. He will cross-check with me and say, oh, this is not correct. This is the correct. So that exposure for 2 years was an abundant material, a great boon for me to become a good endoscopist. And with Professor Cotton, again I learned the basics of ERCP. These were remarkable experiences which nobody can ever forget.
Okay. Next, in view of your seniority, and if I could tread on to a little bit of a delicate area, your role model student.
Well, I have two people to recollect. One was Dr. Pai, who was my student, who became Professor of Gastroenterology at Manipal Medical College. Excellent clinician. And I still very fondly remember the clinical discussions we had after the day of admission and the differential diagnosis, how you would make a diagnosis, what investigations you do. Those type of clinical discussions were amazing. Dr. Thomas, another brilliant gastroenterologist who is my student, and he also followed suit. So these two people were excellent.
So I'm so sure, Varghese Thomas, wherever you are, you'll be sporting a smile right now because you've just been nominated or mentioned as one of Professor K V Nair's role model students. The final question: your dreams and vision for the growth of gastroenterology in Kerala.
When we started, gastroenterology was totally different. And when we are at the moment seeing gastroenterology is totally different. So we need to reorient in many respects. Number one, you need to tailor your investigations, use technology necessarily depending on the clinical aspects of this. Number one, your utility of, and never lose your clinical skills. Number two, the teachers. Because teaching is not an easy job, and in future, particularly in all disciplines of medicine, but gastroenterology also, they should branch out into, after their faculty attainment, they should branch out into 3 spheres, as is going to happen abroad. Either you become a good clinical teacher, or you become a researcher, or you become a skilled technician or endoscopist. All these 3 things cannot be handled by one person, because many people do not have the inclination to do research. They should not feel bad. They should go and further their interest in research. But those teachers who want to train students should have absolutely good clinical skills and the inclination to teach. Unfortunately, that inclination to teach is gradually disappearing, and in many places they don't have time to teach students. And I have heard junior students telling, you go and learn from your seniors. No. Even after many years, even after taking DM, I learned endoscopy through a master who taught me from the very basics. And if somebody is being trained in endoscopy, the teacher should stand with him and show him the way. That is not happening. So good teaching is essential for the growth of the specialty. And
so good teaching, good learning, basically a collective responsibility of the seniors, the juniors, everyone. And I think that is what can take gastroenterology forward. And I think clinical gastroenterology is a subspecialty which is here to stay. It is not going to become extinct. And you are one of the role models for clinical gastroenterology.
And I want to add one more thing, that is, we should not lose sight of the art of medicine, because medicine is not a pure science. Chemistry is 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of oxygen is water, but that doesn't work in medicine. That is the uncertainty of medicine. So knowledge is not enough, but you have to improvise depending on your experience, which is very essential for your diagnosis and treatment. You need to follow the principles of empathy and you should help the patients to overcome their illness by your soothing words and kind gestures. Thirdly, you should not be enamored by wealth, fame, or position. These are evanescent, transient things. Higher goals should be the motto when you take up teaching and the practice of gastroenterology.
You could not have been more eloquent as far as these three messages are concerned. That was Professor K Vinaychandran Nair talking to us on this YouTube channel of Indian Society of Gastroenterology Kerala Chapter. Thank you very much, sir, for having spent your valuable time with valuable bits of advice. I hope and I'm sure that the gastroenterologists, the young, the seniors, all of them who watch this particular program will go back with the important messages that you've given. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.